When pure muscle building is the goal, you might say the veil has been lifted for many of us in regards to sport specific training. Seeing an elite gymnast performing at the top of their game can be insanely motivating, and it's easy to believe that simply doing gymnastics is the quickest route to that gymnast body. But the reality is, you could much more easily replicate this look in a lot less time by avoiding the skill based movements and focusing entirely on basic gym exercises instead. While I do think that training for a sport with muscle as a secondary goal is a worthy pursuit, if building massive biceps is what you're after, you're probably better off doing a curl. With this in mind, it may be easy to write off anything with even the slightest hint of a performance element as unworthy of your time, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Today, I want to talk about the exception to the rule. Today, let's talk about sandbag training. Before we go over why I think sandbag training is in many ways superior for building muscle, we should first talk about the back. It should come as no surprise to anyone who's taken a quick look at my YouTube channel that I'm a bit obsessed with building a massive back. I've trained it every day for almost 300 days now, and it's been a main focus of mine for many years. What first drew me to back training, aside from the fact that a massive back looks awesome, is that it's honest. It's incredibly difficult to build a back that looks able to handle some heavy weight without actually lifting heavy weight. You can get most of the way there with lightweight machines, but there's something about a back that was built with hard and heavy work that just looks better. There's a cohesiveness there. From the back of the neck down to the hips, everything is thick, wide, and looks as though it fits together in exactly the way it was meant to. Of course, this is just my own view on the subject, but I'm sure you've seen someone before who had wide lats and some decent upper back thickness, but almost no development in the lower back. It just looks off. I think a lot of this comes from neglecting one of the back's main functions, stabilizing the spine. Yes, concentric and eccentric loading with rows or pull-ups or whatever is great and necessary, but there's something special about forcing the entire back to work together as one solid unit to support a heavy weight. Here we get back to sandbag training. While barbells are great for getting that look of power that only comes from stabilizing heavy weight, and will most likely be enough on their own to get you the look you're after, there's something about heavy sandbag training that just gets the job done better. Maybe it's the awkward nature of a sandbag that leads to more growth, or maybe it's the many steps required under load to perform any of the basic movements, which leads to superior time under tension, or maybe it's something else I don't understand. Whatever the case, forcing your back to work to its limits to remain rigid while lifting heavy sandbags leads to crazy gains in muscle. And the best part is that sandbag training much more closely resembles training for a sport than it does a gym exercise, which in my opinion means it's incredibly fun. With sandbags, you get to experience the joy that only sport-specific training can give you, with the surprisingly quick gains in muscle that can normally only come from typical gym exercise. It's a win-win. With all of this in mind, I think the easiest way to add sandbag training to a typical bodybuilding routine is to forget sets and reps and periodization and everything else and play. This is what I did, and it continues to work very well for me. Don't even worry about recovery or anything like that. At the end of a regular training day or on an off day, take your sandbag outside and see what you can do with it. Maybe all you can do at first is lift the bag to your lap. Well, for the next 30 minutes or an hour or however long, try to perfect that movement. How quickly and efficiently can I get this bag to my lap? How many different ways can I pick it up? Just have a good time with it. Next time you go to lift the sandbag, maybe you start working towards lifting the bag from your lap to chest height in as many different ways as you can. Then next time try carrying it, and eventually try getting it to your shoulder. Maybe you watch a strongman competition and see an event where they're running with sandbags and loading them onto a platform. Well, why not see how fast you can run 20 yards to your sandbag, pick it up, and run back with it? This may feel strange to you because training is usually very rigid, but with sandbags, it doesn't need to be. Remember when you were a kid, when you went outside for recess, you didn't have a plan, you just did whatever sounded fun, and that's what you can do here. You can rest assured that all that time under load will add up and will lead to new gains in muscle. Alright, well, I do think play is a great way to approach sandbag training. I know many of you will still want that structure, so let me give you some guidelines on how to add sandbags to an existing bodybuilding routine. The first and easiest way is to add some sandbag lifting at the end of any workouts where you're already training your lower body. This makes things easy because you'll already be warmed up. Let's say you run an upper-lower 6 days per week split. All you have to do is add 2 to 3 sets of max distance bear hug carries at the end of your lower body days. You could stop there and still see some nice gains in muscle size. You could also use somewhat of a hybrid approach and give yourself 15 minutes at the end of your lower body days to play like I discussed before and do whatever you'd like, whether it's carries or lifting to chest height or whatever. For most of you, this should be enough. Use that time to get better at the sport of sandbag lifting, and the gains in muscle will follow. For those of you who fall in love with sandbag lifting like I have, the next step might be to replace one of your lower body days entirely. So if you were originally doing that upper-lower 6 days per week program, you might start doing upper 3 times a week, lower 2 times a week, and 1 day of sandbag lifting. Or maybe you train full body 3 times a week. If you like sandbag training, you might switch to full body 2 times a week plus 1 day of sandbag lifting, or add an additional day each week. So full body Monday, Wednesday, Friday with sandbag lifting on Saturday, for example. The options are endless, and it really just depends on how much you enjoy the sport. Finally, we can talk about replacing some of your gym movements with sandbag movements. I saved this one for last, mostly because this is the method that most of you will probably end up using. While sandbag training will build your back in a major way, it works best when combined with other more typical gym stuff. We also need to factor in recovery. There is only so much you can do per week before your central nervous system runs out of steam, and sandbag training can be expensive. So when used for the sole purpose of building muscle, it might be best to have a set plan. I think the best way to show how you might do this is with an example. So let's take a typical routine and infuse it with some sandbag work. Alright, so as you can see here, we have a typical upper-lower bodybuilding routine. We have upper body on Monday and Thursday, and lower body on Tuesday and Friday with 3 days of rest. On the upper body days, you can see we're hitting all of the basic movement patterns. So we have a horizontal push and pull, as well as a vertical push and pull, and we're rotating percentages. So on Monday, the horizontal movements are in that lower rep range, and on Thursday, the vertical movements are in that lower rep range. And finally, to finish those workouts off, we have some isolation work for the arms and shoulders. Then on the lower body days, we have a squat focus day and an RDL focus day. You could use regular deadlifts here instead if you'd like, but you might need to switch to 3x5 depending on how much weight you can lift. After the main movements, we have more work for the posterior chain, and we'll also work the abs and neck. Remember, this is a basic program. There's a lot you could do here to balance things out, like maybe adding in some leg curls or leg press, for example, but for today, I kept things pretty basic. And as you can see here with this second routine where I've added in some sandbag work, the upper body days are exactly the same. In my opinion, on a bodybuilding routine, there's no reason to lift sandbags more than once or twice a week, so we can leave the upper body days alone. As for the lower body days, things are just a bit different. Keep in mind this is just an example, and you could organize this in any way you'd like, really. It's all about manipulating the volume so you don't end up doing more work than you can recover from. So what I chose to do in this example was to keep the volume on the first movements the same while taking away a set from the second and third movements and replacing them with sandbag work. It can be as simple as that. In this next example, I replaced the third movement entirely with sandbag work and kept everything else the same. And in this final example, I've only added sandbag work to one of the days, and that's it. The easiest way to think about sandbag lifting in the context of a bodybuilding routine is as a posterior chain or back and hamstrings movement. So you could add sandbag work in place of anything that would have already focused on that part of the body. It doesn't need to be difficult. Remember that, in my opinion at least, there's a lot more room to personalize your program on a bodybuilding routine than there might be for a program designed specifically to raise your bench or something like that. So don't worry about it. Even if you switch something around to add in some sandbag work and your program becomes less optimal by some standards, it doesn't matter. As long as you continue to make progress on whatever you're doing, you will get bigger.